All right, it looks like it's time for us to get going. Welcome, everybody. I'm Clark Ivory. I'm happy to be with you today. I want to welcome all the business leaders and managers who are joining us today for an installment of the Workforce Resilience webinar series. This is a monthly series produced by Utah Community Builders at the Salt Lake Chamber. It's part of the Salt Lake Chamber's Social Impact Foundation. At these webinars, you'll receive actionable information from experts. We'll hear from the innovators, the advocates, those who help us enhance mental fitness for our employees and make Utah's workforce stronger, more resilient. We want to be one of the most resilient workforces in the nation, and things like this make a difference. Before we get into today's topic, I want to give special recognition and a warm thanks to those who have generously sponsored this important webinar series. Our major leadership sponsor is the George S. and Dory Eccles Foundation. Thanks to Lisa and everyone at that foundation. Our champion sponsor is AT&T. The advocate sponsors include the Larry H. Miller Group of Companies and FJ Management. And our ally sponsors, Bloomquist Hale, Intermountain Healthcare, and the Utah Department of Human Services. Today, we are discussing working parents, students, and educators. The impact of COVID-19, the pandemic on the workforce and the future workforce is concerning to all of us. Coming together as a community to help equip our teachers, our students, and everyone else is important to our future. Working parents in particular have been impacted by what's been going on this last year. And we need to do everything we can to not only help them survive, but to thrive. And if we do the right things, that is possible. With that, I'd like to introduce Tara and Tui from AT&T. Tara is the president of AT&T's Mountain West states, where she leads all external, governmental, and public affairs in Idaho, Montana, and Utah. She also serves on the Salt Lake Chamber's board. We're so pleased to partner with AT&T, a great member of the Chamber, and we thank them for being generous sponsors of the Workforce Resilience through Mental Fitness campaign. And again, for helping us today with this really cool event. So Tara, let's take it from here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Clark. Thanks for the nice introduction. And we're so happy to be a part of this effort through the Chamber, and excited to be able to tell people a little bit more about AT&T Believes and why we're prioritizing this here in Utah. I mean, this year we've all had our share of challenges, COVID-19, and in Utah, earthquakes, windstorms, among many other things. And AT&T's commitment really to keeping people safe and connected has never been stronger. Keeping people safe and connected obviously goes beyond just technology. That's why AT&T has engaged in a company-wide effort called Believes. Believes really harnesses our employees' community engagement and matches it with company resources, joining with local collaborators to try to drive impact at a local level. For us here in Utah, Believe Salt Lake is all about mental wellness. Mental wellness is a key factor in a person's ability to navigate social and economic settings. Access to mental health services and assets is necessary for individuals to elevate their social and economic security, especially in times of need like we're in right now. And while mental health is truly a lifelong journey, it truly is something that begins at an early age. So I'm so glad we're here today talking about specifically education, families, working parents, and the impact it has on our kids. AT&T has made $170,000 in charitable contributions as part of our Believe Salt Lake initiative. Two of our recipients, Safe UT and Intermountain Healthcare, are here to present to us today. These entities focus on mental and social wellness in very different ways, but have equally strong outcomes and positive impacts on our community. Today, like I said, we're going to take a deeper dive about the education environment and how we as a community and educators, parents, employees, and employers can better support one another. Virtual learning has added stress for students and educators and working parents who are trying to balance their jobs, school, family, all under one roof. And since September, we've seen a disproportionate impact on working moms who are leaving the workforce to care for their families. As a working mom with 2 young children, one's 4 and in preschool and one's just 1, I totally get it. It's a tough balance. Today especially has been a struggle for me. If you hear kids, I apologize. This past year, though, for me personally and professionally has been incredibly challenging. If you were on any video calls with me this summer, you probably met one or both of my children. So today's topic is very important to me. And I hope that we're able to leave takeaways with you that will help you and your loved ones, your families, and your employees get through this together. So let's get right to our program and presenters. We are so excited to be joined by Sid Dixon, our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Shannon Delaney, the Superintendent of Iron County School District, Will Levitt from Safe UT, and Marissa Henn from Intermountain Healthcare. So let's start with Sid and Shannon. And just for the sake of brevity, I could call them both superintendent or doctor. I'm going to call them Sid and Shannon. I'm going to turn the time over to them to share their valuable time with us and so we can learn from them. So Sid, Shannon, take it away.
Thank you so much, Tara. I think we've got some slides coming up so that you're not looking at talking heads, but we really appreciate this opportunity to engage with you about mental health. We'll certainly talk about the mental health of our students, but knowing that we are an education community and this involves families and our community partners. So as we closed in soft closure last year, we surveyed all of our superintendents, system leaders, charter directors, and asked them about mental health. And certainly we could see a rise in mental health concerns. And I don't know who's driving, but if you'll move to the next slide, please. Thank you. We knew that stress would be on the rise because we were facing some community conditions that were very real, and they've been addressed already. But really just, if you think about these 4 elements brought on by COVID-19, there was economic loss, and the Chamber is well aware and has discussed at length the issues surrounding economic loss of housing and food insecurity. And this means that some of our older students in particular step into the roles of parenting, whether it's childcare or work, to help with the economic loss. This increased social emotional trauma. We have eyes on our kids when they're in school, and when they're not in school, we know that things are happening in their home, and it's exacerbated when they can't be at school with mental health professionals and their teachers who can help mitigate some of these issues. For many of our students, the meals that they get, for example, are at school, and this is where some students can take a shower or get some help that they need. We also really shown what I would call a stadium light on our broadband situation. We were lucky that we had invested in digital teaching and learning in our state already. So we did have a high number of tools that we were able to execute out into our schools immediately. What we didn't have was adequate bandwidth across the state, and definitely it inhibited many students' ability to engage with digital tools. And then last but not least, and most importantly, we had community virus spread. So just trying to understand that and get a handle on it, and students moving in and out of school as schools close based on the spread in the schools or in the community. And this created varying levels of motivation and engagement when students are in and out of the classroom. Next. So this led to school challenges. We had to provide instruction in multiple modalities, and that's online and hybrid and face-to-face. And for some of our teachers who were trying to do all of these at the same time, it's been a great challenge. And I just can't underscore enough how marvelous our parents, our teachers especially, and all those who support our schools. Our school leaders don't get talked about very often, but I think our school principals and charter directors have really done an amazing job and have had a very heavy load. And then you pile that on to a superintendent who is trying to run a large system. You'll hear from Shannon in a minute what she's done to mitigate a lot of the stress. So along with teaching, then teachers and system leaders have to think about how do we stop the transmission of the disease. So it's changing routines, it's setting up classrooms differently, it's actually changing your instruction to think about movement and might be recess time, how we feed kids, all of those things. first and foremost, as we came back in the fall, we're thinking about how do we address learning delays. And I want to be clear that we can't blame the students for disrupted learning. That's just part of the virus. So when we talk about it, we're saying the learning cycles that would be typical were disrupted based on the very things that are happening in our system. And this creates stress and uncertainty for our students. So we really can see a heightened increase in mental health, social, emotional needs. So we have a challenge and an opportunity based on the stress and uncertainty, and some things that we know that are working that Shannon is going to talk to you specifically about. Having increased opportunities for teachers to learn about trauma, what it does to the brain, and how practices in their classrooms and in the schools can mitigate this. Really making sure that we have mental health professionals, whether it's contracted services or increasing social workers in our schools. We're a state that hasn't really invested in mental health in our schools until the last couple of years. And so now that we have more social workers, nurses, counselors, we need more. They're still spread very thinly, but at least we have some that we haven't had before. That's very helpful. Trying to create routines and a sense of normalcy by just kind of establishing some routines that are quite innovative. And some of these routines, we hear system leaders saying, we're going to keep those in the future. These are lessons learned for us. Another thing that's worked that I know Shannon will talk to you about are providing calming spaces. We might call these wellness rooms, but it's a place for students to go, and we have personnel that are providing interventions, but also a physical space that provides positive mental health. And then really focus time during the day on the whole child. We have schools that are invested in mindfulness practices, yoga, community circles, a lot of things that really just focus very specifically on the mental well-being of our students. Next. So with that, I want to introduce you to a superintendent who is phenomenal. Dr. Shannon Delaney, Superintendent Shannon Delaney, not only has made a huge difference in her community in the way that she's led and focused on social emotional learning, she also leads our Superintendents Association as the current president. And each Monday I receive an inspirational little kind of a newsletter or a moment, and it's very well thought out and it's always so timely. And I know our superintendents have talked about how it's making a difference in their attitude each Monday morning. It's sort of a reset, and it's always focused on our own personal well-being as leaders and how we can move forward in a positive manner. So I can't tell you enough about Shannon, so I'll just turn the time to her. I know she hates anybody bragging on her, but I wanted to take the time to do that because she really is leading in a way that Iron County School District has become a lighthouse for positive social, emotional, and mental well-being of students and staff. So Dr. Delaney.
Thank you, Dr. Dixon. You're very kind. And let me just throw back at you what you gave to me, and that is how appreciative we are as superintendents of her very kind and caring and articulate leadership. She's phenomenal. So thank you, Sid. Okay, so I'm just going to describe a little bit about Iron County School District's journey and how we got to where we are today. 60 years ago, I had been serving in this position for about almost 2 years, and before that had served as a special education, special programs director in the district, as well as serving as a professor and doing research on all of this at BYU. And as I came back to the school district and we looked at our current practices, we could see that what we were doing, what we had been doing for the last 20 years in the district, that there were gaps in services and more of our kiddos needing more intense services that we just weren't able to deliver within our current system of services and supports for students and families. So we sought for some solutions for our kids that we identified as being self-management learners. Those were having behavior issues and trauma issues and mental health kinds of things. And so we did some research, took a team throughout the state and looked at what was happening in other districts at behavior units and what behavior aids were doing. We implemented safety care rather than restraint systems that were antiquated and not working well with our students. And this investigation was helpful, and I believe it was successful. If you talk to my team, I think they would tell you the same thing. And difference making, yes, it was. Go ahead and move to the next slide. However, excuse me, what we soon discovered was that we needed a more systematic approach to provide a fence at the top of the hill, and you can change the slide, instead of an ambulance at the bottom of the hill. And many of you have probably heard this analogy before, but it just really rings true when we look at the things that we are doing for students and their families, especially given our current challenging circumstances. So we did our research. One of the catalysts was showing Paper Tigers and Resilience, those documentaries. And we showed those community-wide in collaboration with our mental health organizations, all of our wraparound services, and held showings of the Resilience documentary within our community, and had several hundred of our community members attend those showings, had great conversations about what they're seeing along with our mental health and our health providers in our community, and our school system leaders as well. Then we made a visit to San Francisco Unified School District, where some groundbreaking research had been taking place on wellness centers and adverse childhood experiences studies. I know those that I'm presenting with today are very familiar with these studies. We then took a trip to Detroit and looked at their trauma-informed practices. They had been leading the way in our nation for a few years. Went to Seattle, looked at yoga and mindfulness and the important role that those interventions and those systems play within a school setting. Visited West Jordan Middle School here in our wonderful state and looked at what they'd been doing with yoga that they'd been implementing for a couple of years. Looked at positive behavior intervention supports, that PBIS systems within our state. And I know a lot of work has been done around those efforts, probably for at least the last 15, 16 years. We looked at restorative solutions training, had some training brought into our district from Randy Compton, and then went to San Diego and looked at restorative justice and restorative practices at a conference there. Go ahead and thank you. And what we discovered was there were lots of options for us. It was just figuring out which ones were going to work best for our students and our families and our community. So we asked the question, how do we mitigate what might be going on below the surface? So even with all of this research, we needed to make sure we knew what was going on with our students. We know that we see the surface, and many times, as Sid described earlier, there are things going on within homes and within our communities and within our schools that we may not be aware of or have time to take a deeper dive into. And so we made sure we took the time to do that. Are our students feeling safe? Are they feeling secure? Are they being loved in school as well as out of school? Are they hungry? All of those things that we know influence their ability to receive an education that's going to help them move into their future. So as we take a look at the topic today and resilience and how we get our kids and our families to a place that they can be productive members of our communities, of our great state, is always on our mind and helps to drive what we do. You can go ahead and switch, thanks. So what did we do and what do we continue to do? We discovered that it was more effective instead of what we had previously been doing with our skills program and pulling students out of the classroom to teach them behaviors. We found that it was much more productive to do that teaching and have that learning occur, just as we do with math and reading and the other things that we teach. To do that in the classroom. So moving to a push-in system rather than a pull-out system. Of course, we know that that provides challenges for our educators as well. Getting used to having that take place within the classroom environment in such a way that it doesn't disrupt learning is critical. And we've learned a lot over the last 6 years and improved those processes. Of course, in-school support rooms, as Sid spoke to earlier, wellness rooms is what we call them, and each school gives a cute acronym based on their school and their needs. Providing a place for classroom and instruction to be brought to the student. That's another room and space that we provide in each of our schools, so that when it is necessary for students to be out of the classroom, in order to address behaviors. We continue to provide that tier 1 in classroom instruction, and that's supported by a support room aide. School-wide positive behavior and intervention support. So more than just saying that we're doing it, making sure that we're including system-wide with all of our practice continuity of services. So again, wellness rooms, bringing restorative practices into our classrooms, as well as into our faculty rooms, so that when issues arise, because we know that our educators are many times taken to the brink because of our current systems or our current challenges in our system practices, that there are conversations that are beneficial for them to have as a faculty. So restorative practices for students and for our educators, clear behavior expectations, and in the next slide you will see a typical, how that typically looks in our schools. Mindfulness and yoga. And I have to say, when that was brought to my attention by my special ed director, Kevin Garrett, who has been phenomenal and really has led out in Iron District in helping us to get where we're at, I was a little bit hesitant and a little bit leery, but not leery of his expertise and our school psychologist expertise. So have been many times in our schools and watched that system, the yoga and mindfulness take place. And it's pretty amazing to watch those students participate, and then the questions and the conversations they have after that participation, how focused and articulate those kiddos are, is amazing. And I am now a convert and a believer and a supporter of mindfulness in our schools. And then monitoring school-wide behaviors that includes behavior data. And this data is talked about within our collaborative teams, our professional learning communities at the school level, at the classroom level, at the district level. So all levels of our system, we are talking about this data and what we're seeing, and it helps to drive what we do. So not just data on academics, but data regarding behaviors and how those are visited about jointly is critical. Okay, thank you. So this is just an example. Iron Springs Elementary is one of our schools. In fact, Dr. Dixon has been there and visited with our wonderful principal, Mr. Nathan Jenkins. And this is what they came up with. So they are the miners, the Iron Springs miners. And these signs are found throughout the school, in the classrooms, in the library, in the hallways, in the restrooms, everywhere where there are behaviors that that may be a little bit different than the context of a classroom during an assembly. So integrity, respect, ownership, now. That's the acronym they chose and what that acronym means. Clear expectations for kids. Okay, we can move on. Thank you. And then also, as Sid recognized earlier, wellness rooms. This was one of the first things that our school leaders recognized would be necessary, because it was going to be different than our previous skills rooms, and the focus would be different. The environment needed to be different. And so these are just examples. The one on the left and in the middle, two of our elementary schools, East Elementary and Iron Springs, and then the one to the right, Cedar Middle School's room as well. And I believe, Sid, you've been in that one as well. The middle school room is called Champs, and I don't remember, I shouldn't have even said that because now I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it is focused on their school priorities. Okay, you can move on. Thank you. And then, of course, finding the why, school culture and student support, and along with student support, family support. That's why we do what we do. And that's what we found is critical. And it's been quite eye-opening as we've moved over the last 6 years, and of course moved over the last year or so as we've dealt with the pandemic and all of the nuances of meeting those challenges. We are grateful that we chose to move down this road, and it certainly has been beneficial to students and families at all levels of our system. Because we know when the why is clear, the how becomes much easier. And it was important to establish that why, as I described previously, for our educators and for our families. And that is a continuous process. We are continually educating and looking at gaps in services. And we've got an awesome community that is so supportive of what we're doing in our schools as well. So there is the True Rams, Parowan High School. They've been one of our, well, they have let out, all of our high schools are now on board and working this process, but they were one of the first ones. Their good administrator, Mr. Roy Matthews, who is now at the district level, he was a part of that original team who went to San Francisco and Detroit and helped with the research and integrated this systematic process at Parowan High School for kids. So it's not whether you get knocked down, it's whether you get back up. Very famous Vince Lombardi quote, and that's what they used to develop the True Rams system of accountability. So being respectable, accountable makes a difference, serving others. I've heard Mr. Matthews speak very often about it, how clear it made it for students and families as he would have tough conversations about behaviors and choices. By starting every conversation with, what does it mean to be a true Ram? And that has become integral to their school. It then bled down into the elementary school that is adjacent to that high school in Parowan, Utah. And they are all true Rams from kindergarten through 12th grade. They developed what they call their Ram Pen, which is essentially their wellness room, their place for students to go and be when they need a time out. We know as adults, we take time out, or at least we should take time out, and we know that when we are feeling anxious, and it's important to recognize that our students need that time away as well. So again, the Ram Pen uses the school as a facility, and our school psychologist and social worker are an integral part of what happens there within the school and within that system. Okay. So when we take a look at connecting these efforts to what is to come of building resilience, helping our students to be prepared for their futures, to understand what it means to take care of yourself, to be resilient, and to learn those skills while they are going through their K-12 education is critical, because we know that they will be faced with challenges once they leave us, once they move to higher ed, whether that be the university or technical college or straight into the workforce. It's important that we recognize as K-12 educators that is critical for us to begin that while they are with us, now even more so than ever. And I feel very fortunate to be a part of a district, a part of a state system that recognizes the importance of social emotional learning and attending to all of our students' needs, attending to the whole child. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity that I've had to visit with you today.
Wow, thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Sid, so much for your remarks today. I hope you can hang with us for a few minutes. I want to let everybody know, if you've got questions for any of our presenters, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will put those forward to any of our presenters as appropriate. And with that, I think we'll move on to our next presentation. I want to introduce Will Levitt. Will is with the Huntsman Mental Health Institute at the University of Utah. He's a project facilitator for the Safe UT program. Will, take it away. And good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen right now. So firstly, I want to thank the Salt Lake Chamber and AT&T for giving me the time to talk a little bit about Safe UT. For those who aren't aware of what Safe UT is, it's the Crisis Chat and School Safety Tip Line app, which has been developed and integrated through the Utah legislature, as well as UHealth, the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, and then our great corporate sponsors like AT&T, who have been absolutely fantastic partners, really going back to the beginning of this program. The reason behind SafeUT and why it was necessary to create an app and a tool specifically for our K through higher ed students, parents, and educators is simply that suicide is the leading cause of death for Utahns aged 10 to 24. Back in 2017, the Youth Risk Behavioral Survey was given out to Utah high school students across the state. And I won't go through all of this data, but the most important thing that I really want to kind of point out is that 9.6% of respondents to that survey said that they had attempted suicide one or more times over the previous 12 months. So when the legislature came together back in 2014, 2015, they realized that the youth suicide really epidemic in Utah needed to be addressed, and we needed to put a tool into the hands of our youth that, number one, they'd feel comfortable using and they would trust. So we came together, we created a commission, which is headed by Attorney General Sean Reyes, to design and implement an app that gives our youth, our parents, and our educators the ability to either call or chat with a master's level mental health professional like a licensed clinical social worker 24/7 at no cost to them, and have it be confidential so they can feel that if they're chatting in with us or they're submitting a tip that is a school safety concern, like they see something on social media, somebody with a weapon or professing maybe suicidal ideation, that they can feel confident that any information that they're putting out there in order to get that person help isn't going to come back that they're the ones that told and perhaps make their life a little bit worse. So since then, and I'll jump into the next slide in a little bit. Since then, we've seen a huge success, and that success really is hinged on the relationships and partnerships that we have, not only with the legislature and our two main champions on the Hill, who are Senator Dan Thatcher and Representative Steve Elison. They're the ones that ran the original bill to create the commission, and they go back up to the Hill every legislative session to go to bat for us and make sure that the funding is in place so that we can keep this resource going and evolving and growing so that it's the most effective and efficient tool for not only our K through higher ed students, but now more importantly, our teachers who are going through added stress with COVID, our parents who, like Tara and Shannon and Sid have talked about, are dealing with things that they might not have thought that they would have to deal with working from home, juggling kids, juggling, bills, everything that they may be going through that they weren't necessarily prepared for. So how it works, and I just want to talk about this because if you haven't downloaded, I would highly suggest you do so. Whether you have a family member, kids, grandkids, employees that you feel that would benefit from using this tool, the three main features of SafeUT are the submit a tip feature. And what we see and what we use that for is if our users with the app see something in school that's concerning, they see somebody vaping in the bathroom, or they go on social media and they see a post perhaps that's concerning enough to them that they want to take the burden off of their shoulders and put it on a professional and let them be made aware of the situation so that those people involved can get the help that they need and make sure everyone is safe. The start a chat feature, it looks like every text conversation you've ever had. This is a therapeutic dialogue between our user and our master's level clinician on our end. It is HIPAA protected. We consider that confidential communication between a provider and a patient, which is our user. Or if they can just start a call with us, if they need to reach out and talk to someone directly, they can do that 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We are not manned by volunteers. Every person on the back end of this is their full-time position. Every single one at least has a master's degree. Some actually have a PhD. And like I said, those are licensed clinical social workers or clinical mental health counselors. So I just want to give a shout out to AT&T and Tara and team. Their generous partnership and donations throughout the years have really been integral in the success that we've seen. This past year, they gave us a grant to focus specifically on metro higher ed institutions, because what we were seeing is In K through 12, our utilization and growth was increasing. However, we weren't seeing that same utilization in our higher ed campuses across the state. So what we've done is we've taken those funds and we've actually created a targeted marketing campaign to make our students and campus community aware that Safe UT is a resource for them even after they graduate high school. And since then, we actually saw a 69% increase in higher ed utilization since that launch of the targeted marketing campaign. It's increased our relationship with the Metro Salt Lake institutions, which is Salt Lake Community College and the University of Utah. And I just want to touch on this. This was the Vice President of Student Affairs at the University of Utah, who said that Safe UT is a great resource, but they didn't know it was available for college students. And so she was very adamant about going out and using her connections to not only talk with campus leadership to push it out even more, but to talk with students. And since then, I've had the opportunity to speak with student leaders at all 8 of our state-funded higher ed institutions across the state. And we're creating marketing campaigns to basically empower the students at these institutions as student ambassadors for Safe UT, but also for just positive mental wellness. So they can go and they can talk to different student groups and colleges and explain the different resources that are available to these students in the campus community as a whole to make sure that the mental wellness of all involved is continuing to go up. To give some data for you guys, so this was the 2019-2020 school year. We saw almost 22,000 chats and almost 9,000 total tips. Those tips run the gamut. The top 5 are suicide, bullying, depression, drugs, and cutting. We also did and performed 583 life-saving interventions from January 2019 through May 2020. And what that means is that if we receive a chat or a call or a tip, and it's an immediate concern to our clinicians where it's an imminent harm to themselves or harm to others, we will activate law enforcement, we will activate EMS, we make the school aware of the situation, we contact parents, and we make sure that whoever is involved in that situation, we're getting the help out to them almost immediately to make sure that if they need saving, they're saved. If they need resources, they get them. And so that number is really fairly huge because we consider that number to be life-saving, interventions that we have put in place. So I could basically take my entire time here and talk about the successes that we've seen, and the successes really are attributed to our relationships with the State Board of Education, with AT&T, the legislature. But the biggest one that I really want to talk about, this one is very near and dear to my heart, and I always kind of tear up when I talk about it, but this is Emma, as you can see in the picture. And Emma's family has agreed to basically use her story to help spread Safe UT as a life-saving resource. So this came from Emma's family. And she wrote into us, my cousin has a daughter named Emma who is struggling. She was using the Safe UT app on Saturday, the 8th of February. Someone named Bryce, who is one of our Safe UT clinicians, was texting back and forth with her as she proceeded to try to take her life. Her parents and I are reaching out because we want to tell someone, anyone, everyone, the Safe UT app and Bryce saved her life. Bryce had gotten enough information to figure out who she was and send the police and paramedics to save her. She survived and is getting help. I know you guys know how important this is, but as someone who has worked and volunteered in a similar capacity, I thought perhaps you and Bryce, if you can find him, might want to know she lived. Her family is more than willing to come and talk to anyone who needs to hear about this app, how it saved their daughter's life. I'm so grateful for you and your work. And to give an update as to Emma, she is doing wonderfully. Her mother let us know that they were in the car and Emma turned to her, and for the first time in that mom's life that she had heard it, Emma said, I don't want to hurt myself. I don't want to die. And the mom said that was absolutely life-changing for her. And Bryce and Emma did get to meet and hug and talk. And so just to show you kind of what the app has done, and we have 1 million of these stories across the state. To give you a little bit of an idea of kind of Safe UT and the growth that we're seeing, we began enrolling just 4 Salt Lake area high schools back in 2016, the first one being Alta High School. And in the 4.5 years since then, we've actually expanded into over 900 K through higher ed schools across the state. This isn't mandatory for schools to enroll, it's all voluntary. And it goes back to the Board of Education being absolutely wonderful in really kind of pushing this out and promoting it as a resource for our students, our parents, and our educators. Safe UTNG was a partnership that we did with the Utah National Guard to create an app similar to Safe UT, which offered the same resources to our active duty service members in the Guard, civilian personnel and their family. That launched on December 6, 2019, so we just have over a year on that. And the success that we've seen there has been huge. And then just 2 weeks ago, we actually launched Safe UT Frontline, which is an app with similar resources where our frontline workers across the state, so those being law enforcement, fire EMS, healthcare personnel, and their family can now chat or call with a master's level clinician 24 hours a day at no cost and confidentially. So what's next for us? I mean, the end goal for Safe UT is to make this available for every citizen of the state of Utah. In order to do that, we really have to increase the infrastructure behind the scenes. We need to increase the number of master's level clinicians that we have on staff. So when our users are reaching out to us, they're getting almost an immediate response within 30 to 45 seconds. And so we don't want to really ramp up without putting the infrastructure in place behind the scenes to make sure that the people that reach out and need help are getting it in a timely manner. To give you an update as to COVID and what we've seen since last May, we have seen a drop in the number of tips. That simply is explained with students that aren't maybe in person in school or in a hybrid model. We've actually seen a match and sometimes an increase in the amount of chats that we're receiving. And the amount of chats that we're receiving, we've actually seen an increase in the acuity of them. So increased anxiety, increased depression, increased suicidality, and suicide ideation. And we've actually seen an increase in utilization from both parents and educators who are now reaching out because they need help themselves. They need to talk to somebody, get resources, get referrals, etc. And I just want to end on this because it's a wonderful quote by Brene Brown. And I think it's always important to kind of take a moment to step back. She said, "It takes courage to say yes to rest and play in a culture where exhaustion is seen as a status symbol." And I guarantee every single person on this call today can relate to that it is very hard to take a step back, take a moment, appreciate the time that we're in right now without feeling overburdened and overstressed. So thank you guys very much. I'll stop sharing my screen right now.
Well, thank you so much. And I just want to share a comment we received in the chat here. It says, "Thank you for this app. My son's school used it and for a school shooting threat. Also, one of my son's friends reported him when he was very emotional and needed extra support. So a school counselor called me about it and I was able to address his stress. So thank you." I read that and almost teared up, and then I saw your story about Emma and did it all over again, and I'm just feeling all the feels right now. Will, thank you so much for everything you and your team do. So before I introduce our final speaker, let me give a special shout out. Will, I saw the launch of the Safe UT Frontline app, and so grateful for that and for everything our frontline workers, teachers, grocery store clerks, first responders, and our military and veterans are doing right now to support our community during the pandemic. Among them is our final speaker, Marissa Henn. Marissa is the Community Health Director for Intermountain Healthcare, and in April of 2020, Intermountain Healthcare and Marissa's team launched the Intermountain Emotional Health Relief Hotline, which is a new free call-in resource for anyone seeking emotional help and guidance during tough times. So Marissa, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to close out our panel today. And I just always learn so much from our partners, especially in education and higher education and folks like Will. There's just so much overlap between this. And I'd love to provide some perspectives on this current moment that we are sitting in. If I can get to the next slide. Let's see. So I just want to open with a quote from one of my public health heroes, Dr. Sandro Galea, who emphasized that COVID-19 is really two pandemics. One is this viral threat. The other is the threat to mental health. The mental health burden of this pandemic is real and will be with us for years to come. And I don't think I need to do any convincing. And luckily, the other experts prior to me have laid this out, that this is a time of large scale destabilization. And we know that when these types of events occur, not just pandemics, but social unrest, wildfires, windstorms, earthquakes, or sometimes all of the above, there is an increased burden of mental health issues in affected populations. And oftentimes young people bear the brunt of this. And it turns out COVID is particularly interesting because the very things we're doing to try to contain the physical threat of the virus, things like social distancing, at times closing schools or businesses, unfortunately, these are some of the same things that can lead to stressors associated with mental health. So it's a challenging time for us, which is why it's important to focus on who's most affected. And to that end, just wanted to share a little bit of data. This is coming from a CDC study done this summer, looking at the prevalence of anxiety or depressive disorders on the left side and suicidal ideation on the right side. And what you can see is that there are some groups that are more affected by these signs of mental distress. In particular, we're concerned about our communities of color, as well as those who have less education than a high school diploma. But I'll also point out that there definitely seems to be some uptick among young people, which here they measured as 18 to 24-year-olds. But there's some indicators that there's been an increase in distress among our younger members of the population and community as well. Fortunately, that has not been associated here in our region with an increase in suicides, for which we are very, very grateful. And no doubt, thanks to the work you've been hearing about, especially things like Safe UT, we do not see an increase in suicide at this time, although we continue to track it very closely. So at Intermountain, and like many of our peer health systems, we knew that this was a time to let no crisis go to waste. And there's some really important drivers of transformation that I want to emphasize. The first being just the urgency of the issues that I've already spoken to. The second is that we're adapting to meet people in wholly new ways, engaging in telehealth and virtual tools. The third is just a recognition, and I love that Will ended with the Brené Brown emphasis, that because she also says that vulnerability is at the heart of innovation. And I think if any of us ever thought that mental health issues were someone else's problem, I would argue none of us would say that we have not shouldered some degree of stress and anxiety over the past year. And then finally, this kind of unique window of opportunity where, thanks to changes in regulation and reimbursement, we are able to be much more flexible and dynamic in delivering services. So the point here is not that we only need to respond to the issues of COVID-19 and the mental health issues that are arising, but that actually this pandemic and this unusual year is leading us to fix some of the many, many longstanding, fragmented, broken aspects of our mental health system more broadly. And so at the very beginning, the kind of first week that many of us were working from home, I reached out to some mental health professionals I work with to say, what are you telling your patients right now? And we started putting together a list of what are the things that our top psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers are telling people, and started promoting this. And All of these are probably familiar themes, so I won't dwell on them. But we know many of the important elements in our family lives, in our communities, and in our own just individual self-care that are important to keep us feeling more whole during this time. But what I want to emphasize is that as a society, we're doing pretty well at many of these individual level factors. But to use a metaphor similar to one that Superintendent Mullaney used regarding the fence and the ambulance, you know, I'll use the metaphor of a fish. Like we're telling the fish, okay, make sure you have a routine every day and make sure you get some exercise and eat healthily and fill out that depression screener when you go to the doctor. But we're not always so good at paying attention to the water. And if you've ever had a fish and you don't pay attention to the water, I think you know that the long-term prospects for that fish are not great. And one of the things that I think is so critical for us to note in this moment is that the water really represents those ubiquitous causes that I think Superintendent Mullaney and Dr. Dixon spoke to so eloquently. These dynamic macrosocial factors in our environment that oftentimes determine and influence our mental and physical health. And so I want to just emphasize a few different ways that Intermountain has been involved with community partners, including the fellow panelists, to engage in more of this macrosocial work. One of the first areas has been a continued focus on gun safety. We know that gun sales are at all-time highs in many cases in our region and across the country. And when it comes to suicide prevention, Intermountain and our state has been working for many years with the pro-gun Second Amendment community to address a problem that affects them almost more than any other group in our state. And we're doing that by emphasizing gun safety, which is already a core element of responsible gun ownership, understanding that it is so critical that when we are struggling or our child is going through a rough time, that is the time to have a friend babysit your guns. That is the time to ensure that any firearms kept in the home are securely locked and ideally in a safe with the ammunition separate. So we've been working with the gun advocacy and gun rights community to reinforce these messages of gun safety and to remind people that there are many things we can be doing in our environment to feel safe right now, other than focusing on just firearm ownership alone. A second thing that we've been doing to try to get at these macro-social, kind of the water in the fishbowl, and with the generous support of AT&T, I'll add, was standing up the Emotional Health Relief Hotline as a free call-in service available 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week for anyone who needs guidance and resources around emotional and psychological health. And it has been a pretty amazing experience. I'd say it's really nice how it complements the offerings of UNI, now the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, in that we're able to hand off people who are in crisis in a very gentle and effective way, while offering comprehensive services to those who are lower acuity and lower risk, who maybe need an appointment, maybe need to be connected with their local mental health authority, or could even benefit from a free mindfulness class, et cetera. And then finally, I want to acknowledge this year's launch of the Live On campaign, which I know there have been prior sessions that the Chamber has sponsored, but just a truly extraordinary opportunity to come together to advance whole new social norms around safety and help seeking and stigma reduction, to change the narrative, to change the culture around mental health and suicide prevention in our state. And we don't know of any other state that has had a campaign modeled on the Parents Empowered Underage Drinking campaign, I'll note, of the scope and scale and evidence base of Live On. So really excited about these ways we're beginning to get at some of that upstream environment across our state and across our region. So I will pause there and really look forward to further discussion. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Marissa. That was really great information. We've had a few questions come in, and so I'll just go through a few of them. First of all, we've had several questions about, can I get your slides? And the Chamber has offered to follow up and share these resources in an email after the fact. Another question for Will. Will, how can people share marketing materials for Safe UT?
Oh, great question. We have cards and posters available in both English and Spanish. We always encourage businesses to have them either for their customers or their employees. If you want, you can just shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to put it in the chat box as an option, or Nick or whoever can share it afterwards. And if you just shoot me an email, I'd be more than happy to get you whatever you need.
Awesome, thanks, Will. Marissa, how can we get more information about Intermountain Healthcare's hotline?
So if you go to intermountainhealthcare.org and just put in the search box the Emotional Health Relief Hotline, or you can go to our COVID page where everything's linked. We've got lots of resources. We also have done a whole library of blogs on ways of promoting mental well-being in your family, in your community, in your school. So really glad to share those materials, and I'll also put my email in the chat if anyone wants more info or has trouble finding it.
Awesome, thank you for that. Another question for Superintendent Delaney. We're wondering how you've seen students and going back in, I'm going to kind of paraphrase this to wrap it up. We're wondering how, students coming back into school this fall, sort of the mental health effects that you've seen with students compared to the spring in the pandemic, and how everything's going.
Sure, thanks for the question. So it definitely has been different. I think our students and our families have just been grateful to be back to school. They are thriving. Yes, even wearing masks to school every day. And some of the things that we thought were going to be problematic with that situation just have not played out. We do have students that we worry about where parents have chosen not to send them back to school, to keep them at home. And so needing to beef up our system of monitoring what's going on in collaboration with parents to ensure that they are still feeling comfortable. In fact, we've had some parents that have chosen to take advantage of the mindfulness, the yoga, the restorative practices, those kinds of things, and then take care of academics at home, and have brought their students for some of those experiences. So it's just been it's been different, and every day is different, and we're needing to be nimble and flexible with our practices to meet the new challenges.
I like that. I also personally want to start doing mindfulness practices with my 4-year-old, maybe start her early. And I'm not much of a yogi myself, but I want to be, so maybe we could learn together. So another question, how can we get more information about volunteer opportunities to share with people who are interested in getting involved in any of your efforts? Maybe Will, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, if you go on our website, safeut.org, there is a little thing you can fill out. And we do, when the world gets back to normal, we do a lot of outreaches at a lot of big events like the Pride Festival, FanX, et cetera, where we do need a lot of help in kind of manning the booth and talking to people about Safe UT. So if you go on our website, you can fill out the volunteer form, and we'll add you to it and go that way.
Anybody else, Marissa?
Yeah, I'll just add, there aren't immediate volunteer opportunities per se within Intermountain that I can highlight, but if you haven't yet done the Question, Persuade, Refer to PR training for your community, for your faith group, for your school, I think that's such a great way to become a leader and really spread the messages of caring for others and encouraging help seeking. And you can go on, I believe it is liveonutah.org to sign up for a training. That is correct. And then you can also, on the Intermountain Zero Suicide website, if you're interested in distributing gum locks, we always are looking for partners to help with that. There's a form. Thanks.
Thank you. And I have got a question for Superintendent Dixon as well. I've heard failing rates have skyrocketed in high schools due to the pandemic circumstances. Can you comment on that?
I can get unmuted. Great question. You know, there's some things we know right now, and there's some things that we won't know until end of the year. And so we're tracking amount of credits attempted versus credits earned, and looking at attendance and some of those kinds of things. We're in a situation where we've got so many learning modalities that we have to think outside of how perhaps we were schooled. I talk about the 3 B's that drive traditional schooling that we think about, and that's, you know, bells and buses and butt time or seat time. That's kind of how we capture the structure of schools sometimes. So we have to think away from that, given that kids are learning at home, learning at school and at home, and learning is kind of 24/7. It doesn't just happen at school. So I want to be very precise about the data rather than just capturing it as failing. Right now, we're comparing to what would be a typical learning cycle. And we can see that for the most part, it looks like students are not completing attempted credits. There's probably anywhere from a 5 to a 20% difference in our secondary schools. And again, when we know more, we'll start to slice that data by understanding the kind of modality that they were learning in. We also know that for systems that have been mostly in person, like Iron County and other districts, when students are in an online setting in that same system. So for example, maybe a teacher is teaching full-time in person and they have students online that they teach after school or engage with a couple of times a week. We know that students in those situations are not doing as well as their face-to-face counterparts. So we do have some pockets of data. We'll know a lot more when we get to the end of the year. And a lot of efforts using federal funding, and we've asked for state funding as well, really targeting, trying to ensure that we're mitigating disrupted learning. So that's where you're seeing efforts now, things like extended school years, days, small group tutoring, individual tutoring, but trying to get very personalized to meet mental health needs and academic needs.
That's super interesting how everything really is changing so fast. But I mean, kudos to the education community for stepping up and like making the changes to make it work as we need. So I hate to do this, but we've run out of time today. I think we're actually 3 minutes over. Sorry, Salt Lake Chamber. I want to thank all of our presenters and community partners so much for being here. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope all of our viewers have learned some tools to take and use in their own lives and in their workplaces. Special thanks to the Salt Lake Chamber and especially to Nick Dunn and Marissa Bomis for running the technology and making this whole event happen. So we hope everybody has a great day and a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. Bye.